But I was a hockey-related question.
Okay.
I know that Jillian doesn't care about hockey too much, but how do you feel about the rebuild?
Are you talking about the stadium in Calgary?
Are you really going to put me on the spot here?
It's rolling, by the way.
Is that what we're talking about?
We're rolling
the
on
stadium?
No, he's talking about the rebuild of the Calgary Flames because I'm wearing the Flames hat. He wants my gist on.
I'm not going to chime in because I'm a Habs fan, so I'll just stay here.
We can't all be perfect. So let me just say this. Being somebody who's an entrepreneur and understands what it takes to grow.
3 hours later.
He keeps outpricing himself out of the draft, then you can ask me. But I think that this stage of the rebuild is going to be all right.
And Jillian, how do you feel about it?
So you put the puck in the net, and then you go to playoffs. Playoffs? Are we talking about playoffs?
As a young man, heard the sky's the limit. First thing first, I'ma break through the ceiling. One life jam, but it feels infinite. One life jam, then I better go get it. Start at the bed in my suede.
This podcast is being brought to you by the Reyes Group at IA Private Wealth. That is made up of myself, John Reyes, a wealth advisor, and Jillian Seguin, an associate wealth advisor.
Welcome to a Bearable Conversation with Jillian Seguin.
No. What's your name and title, John, please?
Welcome to a Bearable Conversation with John Reyes, wealth advisor at Reyes Group, IA Private Wealth, and I'm joined with my Bearable
Jillian
partner.
Seguin, associate wealth advisor at IA Private Wealth, Reyes Group.
If you continue to follow these podcasts, and I really hope that we do them for a really long time to come, I know she's waiting for the moment that associate gets dropped from her title, and we'll be sure to highlight that with a special podcast when it gets to that point, just so we're clear. She's not an associate, just happens to be the title.
That's because I have more designations than you.
Okay. This is also true, and now moving along to a topic that is so very fresh in our minds, which is called the trusted contact. Sorry if we're going to get a little, I don't know if the word's nerdy or technical, so we're going to give a little bit of background on what this podcast is going to be about. In recent years, our financial services industry has been evolving and changing to be able to adapt to the aging population that is the Canadian demographic. I can't remember the exact statistic, but it is pretty well known that we have a very aging population, and there is going to be a tremendous amount of wealth transfer that is going to occur over the next decade to 15 years. What people don't seem to grasp is, an aging population is a very, one line for what is a very complicated and can become a very complicated stage of life, where a lot of things can happen both to the person mentally, can happen to a person financially, can happen to dynamics of families, physically, emotionally. And thankfully, our industry has uncovered that sometimes you need to have a trusted contact. You need to have somebody that maybe isn't somebody that the client would necessarily rely upon to help them make decisions or be involved in the financial affairs, but rather somebody that is, close to the family that, we collectively being the advisors and the client are comfortable reaching out to in the event that we have things to talk about, whether they could be concerns or whatnot.
So as everyone who's opened an investment account knows, there's pretty detailed documentation that you must complete with your advisor, and this trusted contact is a new field on these documents, new account applications. It's not yet a requirement, but
it should be.
It should be under what we believe. And again, just to elaborate a little bit more on what John is saying, this is not somebody who would have trading authority or have any knowledge about your finances or your investment accounts or be able to have any decision-making power. That would be, as I say, a trading authority or a power of attorney.
Yeah, different
This
documentation.
is simply a name for us to have in the event that we couldn't contact our client. we're worried about cognitive impairment, or just worried about them in general, that we feel that something might be happening externally that we're not aware of, or we're not privy to all of the information. And given that level of concern, we would have this individual that we could call.
Yeah, and for us, it hits home because, over the last while, we've had, unfortunately, situations where we go through the process, and because, as Jill has alluded to, it isn't a requirement per se, although, like most things, we're now debating whether or not we make it an internal policy at Reyes Group that we ensure, that everybody has this, and I'll explain why. So imagine for a moment that you have a relationship with your client, and the client is somebody who is single, who is older, who doesn't have much family in terms of having direct communication with.
No children, no next of kin. And very happy people, right? This isn't. We're not trying to paint a picture of somebody who is doom and gloom and sitting on their own and not having life. No, very fulfilling life, very active, very much with it, has good cognitive function, and is an older person. And because you've advised this individual for close to 10 years, you have built up what is, a repeatable pattern, right? Like when you've worked with people long enough, they often will stick to a certain flow or a certain, series of expectations that are very predictable. So when all of a sudden a series of events occur that now are outside of that individual's character
or way of doing things, it becomes very difficult to talk to that individual when they're at the center of the concern. And it can become very, very uncomfortable very quickly for the advisor, because what's a very little known fact, and I'll let you chime in on this, is in the industry, one of the industry slangs that we use is we have to, we're responsible for taking the gun out of our clients' hands. So I'm going to let Jill explain that a little bit more in terms of what that means, and then we'll come back to the story.
So ultimately what you are referring to in kind of a streetwise manner, taking the gun out of a client's hand, is our fiduciary responsibility to our clients. And when you hold expertise that a client who doesn't have those expertise, or an individual who doesn't have those expertise is relying on you to provide advice based on those expertise, that's what the fiduciary duty is. So I gave an example to a client earlier this week, and I said, a doctor has a fiduciary duty to their patient. You come in complaining about your elbow, they have a responsibility to examine you and give you whatever prescription or diagnosis that is in your best interest to resolve the sore elbow. They can't go and prescribe a medication that will line their pockets, because it's probably an expensive medication that's going to improve your sight, because that is not the issue at hand. And so no different, we have that fiduciary duty to our clients, that when they come to us and ask for our advice based on their particular situation, though it may not be something they want to hear or be comfortable with or be happy with, we have to deliver that news that is in their best interest.
Yeah, and I think the challenge that we face too is, and again, I don't want to skirt the line about saying that these issues fall within a certain demographic, but the reality is we all know as we age, there becomes a possibility of increased memory, cognitive, impairments that can lead to forgetfulness, that can lead to being vulnerable, that can have you exposed if you happen to find yourself in the wrong situation with the wrong groups of people. And the worst part of it is that, and again, I'm speaking from a point of experience. My mother had early onset dementia, and that experience is something I would never wish upon anybody. But what I did take from it, as heartbreaking as it was, is I took some valuable lessons out of it, cues, how to read situations, how to really define if somebody is, in fact, dealing with a cognitive impairment. And I can tell you, here's a very, very cute story to share this. When I was trying to help my mom have some dignity early on, you go through a series of different types of exercises to try to help her keep her dignity. And one of them is going to sound awful now when I say it in hindsight, is to essentially take her to an adult playgroup. And the adult playgroup was something where you could take them to a safe place. And when I initially thought about it, and I was taking my mom, she was still, at times, remembered me and wasn't full on missing her memory. And so I remember taking her, and she wasn't so sure about why she was going, but she was excited, and we went and we met at this library. And the whole objective is that it was a safe place for a bunch of adults. And what I found interesting was there was a lot of adults that were there. And this is a cute part of the story, so I sat back and had my Tim Hortons cup, and my mom's out there wandering in the room, socializing and talking along with everybody else. And then she found a lady, and they were close enough for me to hear, and they both looked at each other and said, "Hey, my name's, such and such, and my name is this." And they both kind of looked over their shoulders and then said to each other, "Do you know why you're here?" And she said, "No." And she said, "Okay, well, at least that makes two of us." Aww. And so for me, it was one of those moments of if you're dealing with a cognitive impairment, you don't know that you're dealing with a cognitive impairment. And so having a conversation with somebody who may be facing a situation that they don't understand can become very difficult. And that is why a trusted contact becomes a very useful tool, because you can still give the dignity to the person that maybe is not understanding that they're dealing with something difficult and asking for large sums of money to be withdrawn, or asking for things that are maybe outside of their ordinary, getting checks made to different people that we've never heard of, and there's stories and stories and stories. But if we can then say, "Thank you very much, Mrs. Client or Mr. Client," and say, "I'm going to call you right back," and now we can reach for the trusted contact.
Mm-hmm.
Guess
it's
what?
another tool in our belt to protect that client.
And it very might well be that what is happening is legitimate, and nobody has to lose dignity, right? The person doesn't feel put off. We don't make ourselves feel gutted from the experience. But often if we get to the point of having to call a trusted contact, there is enough signs that have said we need to do that.
I would like to make one last sort of recommendation on that trusted contact, or for the betterment of selecting your power of attorney, is our first inclination is to pick a friend or a family member that may be the same age as us. And depending on when you give that power of attorney or that executor or that trusted contact, it may be when you guys are all in your 40s and very capable of handling decision making and so on. But you're all going to age in tandem. And so I would just give that little caveat that if you're going to give a trusted contact, and for us, we're trying to say, above a certain age, this is going to be a requirement. We don't necessarily want somebody who is older or of that age.
Yeah, because then it's not serving its purpose.
Yeah, when it's time to, hopefully not, but if it's time to enact it, we don't want to be, calling an 89-year-old on behalf of an 89-year-old that we're worried about their decision-making skills. And so, that's just one thing. A lot of times we have those conversations with clients when we're looking over wills or power of attorneys and saying, well, this person may predecease you because they're much older than you. Something to look over and consider.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. Is that I think Jill touched on it. I just touched on the story. It's a really big balancing act when you're talking about ensuring that you respect people's dignity, that you ensure that you're you're not questioning
And
them.
privacy too.
And the privacy. And the reason why I say this is you don't want to be 75, 80, 85 and now having to be forced to make these decisions, right? That's not the time to be doing it. Again, there's a lot of other things that can unfold from that. And again, I'm sensing it myself, so I'm not sure if audience is, but this isn't supposed to be a downer. Like, these aren't things that I want people to take away from and say, I'm going to get old and lose my mind and I have to have somebody that they need to call. No. It's about making sure that you've got the right checks and balances.
And
right?
having those nasty advisors that will make you look death and the downside of life head on.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to touch that, but we'll remind you of it daily.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we just want to thank you again for joining us for this Bearable Conversation. And we'll see you next time.
As a young man, heard the sky's the limit. First thing first, I'ma break through the ceiling. One life jam, but it feels infinite. One life.
This information has been prepared by John Reyes, Wealth Advisor, and Jillian Seguin, Associate Wealth Advisor, who are part of Reyes Group at IA Private Wealth, and does not necessarily reflect the opinion of IA Private Wealth. The information contained in this podcast comes from sources we believe reliable, but we cannot guarantee its accuracy or reliability. The opinions expressed are based on an analysis and interpretation dating from the date of publication and are subject to change without notice. Furthermore, they do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any of the securities mentioned. The information contained herein may not apply to all types of investors. IA Private Wealth Incorporated is a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada. IA Private Wealth is a trademark and a business name under which IA Private Wealth Inc. operates. The podcast is a general discussion of certain issues intended as a general information only and should not be relied upon as tax or legal advice. Please obtain professional advice in the context of your particular circumstance. Only products and services offered through IA Private Wealth Inc. are covered by the Canadian Investor Protection Fund.
Who the hell is James Brown?
Come here, we talking about Mr. Dynamite. We're talking about the Godfather of soul.